the presentation and discussion for item D, we will take a public comment.
So I'm going to go ahead and kick this off, directors. Good morning. My name is Bob Powers. I'm the Deputy General Manager with Bart, and sort of the point on working with VTA as we do, in my mind, I break it up into kind of three pieces. One is get phase one into revenue service. That's one piece. The second piece is the operations and maintenance agreement. And then the third piece is phase two and the tunneling methodology. So as promised to then President Director Saltzman and now President Rayburn, we would update the board every 2 weeks on where we are with this project. So this is our 7th update in a row on this project. The last update, we briefed the board and focused on the operation and maintenance agreement and gave you an update on where we are with that effort. This update is going to focus on the tunneling methodology for phase two. And again, this is a very fluid process. Information, weekly meetings, weekly discussions, daily discussions with VTA. And so I think Paul is going to kick it off, and then some of the key subject matter experts working with Bart and VTA to bring phase two and on the tunneling methodology will lead this discussion. So Paul, you want to take it from here?
Sure. So I'm going to give a little bit of a high-level operations perspective on where we are with this project and what our concerns are. There are a lot of design elements in this extension that I think if the builder and the ultimate operator were the same agency, would be a lot different than they are. But we recognize the imperative of working together with VTA to keep the project moving forward. And that has really necessitated that we narrow our concerns really down to the most basic elements that not necessarily things that we don't like, but things that we, from particularly a life safety standpoint, just feel that we cannot agree to. And so really what this presentation is about, based on what we know will be 50 to 100 years of successful operation of this line, is the safety concerns that we think need to be addressed now. Otherwise, at some point during that time period, our concern is that there's a greater likelihood that there will be an incident that has a bad outcome. Because of VTA's overriding concern about the street-level construction impacts of the twin-bore design, particularly along Santa Clara Avenue, our plan A is still to come up with a single-bore design, which is what they prefer, that also meets our safety concerns and requirements. As you'll hear today during the presentation, no such alternative has yet been identified to the satisfaction of both the agencies. Because safety has to take precedence over all the other issues, our plan B is to work with VTA to develop a twin-bore option that minimizes the construction impacts to the 4-block area or so of Santa Clara Avenue, while at the same time addressing our core safety concerns. As a heavy rail subway operator, which is what we are, we understand and have experienced that when you have the combination of a smoke fire incident involving trains with passengers on the trains in an underground tunnel, you have about the most critical, chaotic, and intense of all situations that we're asked to manage in our role as operators. And we also know that in these situations, customers don't always do as they're told, employees don't always perform as they were trained, and systems don't always work as they were designed to work. That's why in sort of the fog that nearly always surrounds one of these very critical type of incidents, the benefits of simplicity, consistency, standardization, and intuitiveness is what can make the difference between a safe outcome and something that is much, much worse. In the long life of this asset, there's a great likelihood that at some point the safety concerns that we have at this stage of the project will come into play. And I would just like to sort of drive home the reality of what we're talking about. And this is not meant to be overly dramatic, but the truth is that there's two dates that sort of stand out in my mind. They're nearly 36 years apart, almost to the day, but they kind of make the point of how real these concerns are. One date is January 17th, 1979. That was the day of the Bart Transbay Tube fire. And then almost 36 years later to the day, January 12th, 2015, that was the date of the WMATA La Font Plaza fire. In both cases, we had this mix of trains, passengers, fire and smoke in an underground tunnel. In both cases, ventilation and ventilation schemes were a major part of how the incident played out, and unfortunately, in both cases, there was a fatality that resulted from the incident. You know, we have, when you look back at the history of Bart, one could say that we've spent a good portion of our 45 plus years of operation trying to mitigate the impacts of Bart's one-offness. And by that I mean our non-standard gauge, our non-standard electrical distribution system, our lightweight cars, it just goes on and on. From our perspective, it would be a step backwards at this point to introduce a new tunnel design that requires new evacuation procedures, different ventilation schemes, and changed first responder protocols. Yes, that's the next page. Thank you. So that was, sorry, but that was by way of introduction and to give you a perspective on what our high-level concerns are. So this next slide is actually a version of what we presented to the Peer Review Safety Committee back in November when we met down in San Jose with industry experts to talk about our operational and safety concerns. And it just shows the contrast between the two technologies that were under discussion, that are still under discussion, in terms of transit. And the two designs are twin bore and single bore. It is an absolute fact that in the transit industry, the standard industry practice in rail transit is to go with the twin bore. You have to look far and wide to find any system, and in fact there is no system that is entirely single bore. The best that we were able to find, the best that VTA was able to find, was one part of one line in Barcelona, Spain. And I would respectfully suggest that when you look at their method of operation and compare it to Bart, their trains are 60% shorter. Maximum load on one of their trains would be around 700 people versus 2,000 on Bart. They are much more like an airport. They're closer to being an airport type people mover system than they are to a heavy rail subway operator. So there are vast differences between the way we operate and the way they operate. So as I've said in my introduction, our concerns have been boiled down just to the life safety issues. And just to be very clear, on the VTA side, what is driving the concern there in terms of the ultimate design decisions is very, very much focused on street level disruption, not at the 4 stations that are part of this extension, just at one of the 4 stations, the one in downtown San Jose. And then lastly, just to sort of take the cost issue off the table, when you compare the cost of the two designs, the two construction techniques, it's a little bit of an apples and oranges comparison because the twin bore is much further along in how far they are down the design path. They're, depending on whether you're looking at stations or tunnels, they're at the 65 to 95% design level. Whereas for the single bore design, they're still basically at the conceptual level. So the result of that is that it's really difficult to do an apples to oranges comparison of what the costs are, or at least the construction costs. We know that the ongoing operating and maintenance costs are higher for single bore. I think just where I would leave it is that, particularly in light of the life safety concerns that we have, cost really isn't shouldn't be, and I don't think is a driver in terms of the ultimate decision that gets made here. And then with that, I will turn it over to Bob Mitroff.
Good morning, directors. I'm going to be walking you through the base option for the single bore design and a number of features of that option, including the tunnel diameter, the track alignment, the number of transitions, the platform configuration, the platform widths, and the station construction method. And I'm going to focus on those 6 different attributes of each alternatives as I walk through the base, the modified base, and all of the other alternatives that have been considered. The single bore base alternative has some key features. One is you've got 4 transitions between side-by-side tracks and stacked tracks. And then you've got 2 long sections, one near the Alum Rock station, and then one between the downtown and the Diridon stations where you are in a stacked track alignment. You're dealing with a 45-foot wide single bore tunnel as well. As far as the station design is concerned, again, focusing on the safety attributes of the differences between the twin bore station and the single bore station. The first thing you notice in this drawing is that the twin bore station is much shallower. The depth of the platform there is 55 feet. The depth of the single bore station platform is 85 feet. 85 feet below the surface, imagine you're at the Embarcadero station at the Bart level and you go 1 level down from there. This is going to having such a deep platform is going to have a significant impact on your ability to get people to the street as a point of safety within the 6 minutes that is the governing code amount. We estimate that with a few minor adjustments, the twin bore station can get you from the platform to the street within 6 minutes, whereas the single bore station can take you as long as 11 minutes to get from the bottom platform to the street. There's an additional issue that has to be considered in that for safety perspective, and that is the multiple entrances on the twin bore station. It will have 6 to 8 entrances on both sides of Santa Clara Street, whereas the single bore station would just have 2 entrances fairly close together on the north side of Santa Clara Street, and then there would be portals between those entrances and the actual station platform. We raised this issue because although you could get to an engineered point of safety within the underground area of the single bore station in response to a train fire, that design with the limited number of entrances to the platform presents a problem in other emergency events, such as an active shooter, a fire in the station, or a terrorist or arson incident. Again, there are 5 escalators that take you from the bottom platform of the single bore station to street level. And during evacuation, an emergency, those escalators are frozen, so they turn to stairs. So you're walking up all those stairs to get to the street by code. And the same is true of the elevators. Anything else on the ventilation, Barney, that you'd like to add?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for letting me speak to you, directors. Yeah, the depth of the ventilation in this situation, particularly in the single bore configuration, poses a problem because you've got this large atrium there that potentially, if there's a fire in what can be considered the concourse area, now you've got this large atrium which requires a separate and kind of special ventilation. We've not really gotten a clear concept of what the ventilation is going to be for the platform area. They have proposed a number of options, and the real issue becomes the complexity of how to control any sort of ventilation system or the multiple ventilation systems, and and particularly Bart has an extremely good ventilation system. It's pretty well computer controlled, and it's has the flexibility that it is quite intuitive. If you start adding complexity to it and stuff like that, and if the computer system for some reason decides to not be cooperative, then these complex ventilation systems that are being discussed and being proposed are no longer intuitive, and that, as Paul and Bob have indicated, becomes a huge issue in providing safety.
This slide is just a summary of the attributes of each station. I pretty much went over all of these: the depth of the platform, the number of entrances. The narrowness of the stacked platforms in the single bore design is also an issue. We prefer a center platform because it allows you to use the off-peak half of the platform to handle the peak period crowd. Whereas when you have stacked platforms like you do here, you're only limited to the 15 feet that you have to handle the peak crowd. So that poses an issue during evacuation because people have to have at least 5 square feet of space around them to be able to move out of the platform area and into the concourse. Okay, this is a cross-section of a conventional twin-bore tunnel design for Bart. You will note that you've got 2 tunnels about 20 feet wide, and then you've got a cross passage, and you will have 33 of these within the 4-mile subway, which has a number of desirable features. It is level with the train. It has doors on either side to prevent smoke, to serve as a buffer from the smoke from the incident train to the rescue train. Okay. Anything else on that, Tom?
The advantage of this configuration when you have an emergency incident is that the patrons from the incident train can pass through the passageway, and it allows you to corral them there so that they don't end up in the trackway for the rescue train. When you don't have this configuration, if you have a stacked, you have to bring people up or down, or if you have 2 tracks that are connected but don't have a passageway, then the patrons go from the incident track to the rescue track, and you have a much higher risk of patrons ending up on the trackway as the crowding around the doorway becomes greater. So the advantage of this is crowd control for an emergency evacuation.
BFS, what's it mean?
Bart Facility Standards.
Thank you.
Sure. This is a very important slide. This is one of the things that the peer review panel focused on, I think, more than anything when we were making our presentation. It shows the transition within the tunnel, the single-bore tunnel, between side-by-side trackway and stacked trackway. So as you look on the left, you've got, I'm sorry for the size of the image there. When you look on the left, you've got the trains within the tunnel in a side-by-side trackway operation being separated by a doorway. This design, compared to the design we saw before with the mined cross passages, has a less of a buffer zone between the incident train and the rescue train, so that concerns us. But what concerns us the most is as the tracks go from side-by-side to stacked, you lose your stairway between the tracks for a nearly 1,000 feet distance from the 3rd tunnel cross-section to the 2nd to the right. That is 3.5 football fields where people, depending on where the incident on the train is, are going to have to use the 30-inch walkway to get to the stairway that ultimately leads them to the rescue train and to the point of safety. And
Stop for a minute. Sure. Everyone get that? There's a lot of words and a lot of different. So, as you're going from this configuration right here, this is fine because you can still go across. When you move to this configuration, you can't cross to a rescue train, so you have to walk to a rescue train. The distance, the 3 football fields or whatever length of the stretch.
So essentially the problem is in the braided section. When you're side by side, you can walk from one to the other. When you're stacked, you can go up a staircase 20 feet, one to the other. but during the process of braiding, you lose the accessibility to the other tunnel.
And conversely, the one thing that, yes, you can go up stairways, but you may have to go downstairs ways, which is intuitively in an emergency not the direction that you're going to want to go. You know, who wants to go down further into a deep tunnel if it's an emergency? So.
Okay, another issue, and I'll kick this off and Barney will finish it up, is that the design of the tunnel from a ventilation perspective, when you go from side by side to stacked, changes the amount of the tunnel that needs to be ventilated. Within the side by side alignment, you could ventilate just those two sections where the trains are running. But as you transition to the stacked alignment, you're ventilating the entire tunnel. So you need a much bigger, more complex, with longitudinal and transverse fan networks, and a much more complex control system. And in this case, because what you're trying to do is maintain a constant air velocity within a variable designed tunnel. Complexity could lead to, there's a higher risk of failure with this more complex design, especially if the automatic controls don't kick in and you're having to do it manually.
Absolutely. If you look at the tunnels if you look at the cross section on the very left hand side, there's where the trains are basically two 200 square foot tunnels. So, and that's very standard to what Bart has now. As you transition through, you might see that on top there's a bunch of space, and on the bottom of that first cross section there's a bunch of space. That's 900 square feet. That's 4 times the 200 square feet that's an actual tunnel. So as you transition through to the stacked, now all of a sudden more and more of that area comes involved, which means in order to ventilate that space, the fans have to be bigger, the controls have to be better. Maybe you have to have multiple fans to stage them on as you get to a bigger cross-section area to maintain airflow. Again, that gets more complicated as you potentially have to stage on 1, 2, 3, 4 fans. The 200 square feet of that first tunnel is not so much of a problem as far as ventilation. It's as it transitions and gets into the much more complex areas of the cross-sectional areas and the crossovers that makes a problem. The tunnel ventilation is based on what's called the critical velocity, and that's based on a variety of parameters, which I could go into if you want. But as tunnels get bigger, you have to stage the fans bigger in order to. But then what happens conversely is that when you get back to the smaller sections, now those large fans are creating much higher velocities in the smaller tunnels, and that gets actually critical and could exceed the code requirements. So you end up being limited by the 2,200 feet a minute, which is what the code allows in the small sections. That then makes getting proper ventilation in the large sections extremely difficult.
Just to tie it back to what Paul was saying before, the fire in DC, I don't know about the one at Bart, but the fire in DC, the diagnosis from that is the fans. One of the problems is the ventilation system was there, but they put the fans in the wrong direction. So the more complex the configuration of the tunnel and the fact that it's changing, I think we've got the concern that the direction of the fans and the operation of that to clear out wherever people are becomes far more complex than anyone would want to have on their hands.
So these issues were presented to the peer review committee that met in mid-November of last year. The peer review panel members were composed of senior executives in operations and construction from LA Metro, SFMTA, New York City Transit, WMATA, New York MTA, and MARTA. And one of the main issues that they focused on is what are the risks and challenges associated with the single bore option, and can it be operated and maintained as safely as an extension of the BART system? They determined that the base design, presented an undetermined risk due to its variance from the current Bart twin bore design. Specifically, they focused on the transition areas as presenting the most risk during train evacuations, and they highlighted a number of the things that we just mentioned. You have to rely on stairs for evacuation in the stacked alignment. Sometimes you're actually going from an upper level to a lower level during an emergency evacuation, which is a counterintuitive move. You're putting a huge amount of pressure on the single first responder, which is the train operator. And you're moving away from standardization, and that raises the issues that Barney was speaking about with respect to ventilation, given how it's different from the rest of the BART system. Training can help, but as Paul has mentioned before, in a moment of an emergency, in the fog of war, the equipment and the infrastructure has to be as intuitive and consistent with the rest of the BART system as possible. There are other issues with it, less related to safety, but maintaining all of those escalators in service with those very deep stations is going to be an expense as well as a challenge, as we all know. Single bore has been used in roadways, but never in a heavy rail transit design in the United States. And while VTA would be the owner of the facilities, in the event of an emergency, BART would be the de facto owner. They recommend that the project go forward with a unified front, and that the safety and operational issues that BART has raised be recognized and reconciled by both parties. If you had to choose one alternative, they recommended that the twin bore be the alternative going forward at that time. Single bore could be operated in a manner which is consistent with BART's safety objectives, but there would have to be a lot of work done on the consistency, the training, the fire life safety. But even with all that, the risks outweigh the benefits with this method of construction. They did instruct the panel to work on design options to single bore that could meet BART's design safety concerns, and we'll discuss those now. In order to have a productive discussion between the two agencies on a design options for single bore, VTA asked BART what are our main objectives in the design of such systems. Those are laid out here. We want side-by-side, not stacked trackways, in the tunnels and at all stations. We prefer center platforms with sufficient width to handle future ridership. Another issue with the side stack platforms at their downtown station is they're 15 feet wide, and they're built inside a tunnel, and that's it for 100 years. The ventilation system should be consistent with our existing ventilation systems, especially during emergency. The design for fire growth should be consistent with NFPA, National Fire Prevention Association 130 provisions, the California Building Code, and our own facility standards, which call for an instantaneous fire growth scenario, which is something you have to look at in the event of an arson fire or a train on fire coming into a station. BART is willing to consider an engineered point of safety underground, provided that it meets all of the provisions of these same three codes, the NFPA, the CBC, and the BART facility standards. We are very concerned in all of this that the people who have mobility issues can be safely evacuated from an incident train to a point of safety. Therefore, we wanted both sides to develop an emergency response plan with input from first responders, fire departments, our system safety department, as well as the ADA community in the larger BART district, as well as Santa Clara County. Just to frame the issues that we're dealing with in terms of the passenger volumes at the stations we're most concerned about, and again, we're most concerned about the downtown San Jose station. That is projected in 10 years after its opening date, in approximately year 2035, to have 24,000 daily entries and exits, which puts it in line with some of our medium-sized subway stations, such as the downtown Oakland station, downtown Berkeley, 16th and 24th in Mission. The other stations that they would be building within the subway are more in the range of the Ashby and North Berkeley ridership levels. Again, all of the stations that I've mentioned here have center platforms within the subway. So the key features that we were looking at, and I raised this earlier, when we talk through the design options, these are the things that are going to be varying. The tunnel diameter, its variation from the 45-foot external width of the VTA single-bore base option, the track alignment, whether it's side-by-side or stacked, the number of transitions, with 4 being the number in the base option, the platform configuration, whether you have level-side platforms, stack-side platforms, or center platforms, the absolute width of the platform, and the station construction method, whether it is an inside-the-tunnel construction, as the VTA single-bore base option is, or whether you're doing cut-and-cover construction. So the first option that VTA presented to us is basically sort of a minor variation on the base alternative, where they are going to construct, and you see them in the red squares on the diagram, emergency exit stairs from the tunnel in the transition sections. This would allow you to reduce the evacuation distance in the tunnel from 1,000 feet, 3 football fields, to 500 feet, 1.5 football fields. Mind you that you're still 80 feet underground. You have to walk up 8.5 flights of stairs to get to the street. So this is an improvement, but it's not the game changer that we needed to be able to recommend this option to you. It has one additional feature, and that was to address the fact that a station that only has 2 entrances is likely to have a conflict in emergency exiting traffic between the first responders and the patrons. So they are proposing to install a separate first responder only stairway within the station to get first responders from the concourse to the platform. But again, that's going to be 8 flights of stairs to get to the bottom of the platform. So this is the option that VTA is recommending at this time. Bart staff cannot recommend this option to you. There are other options that we will be going through that we think have merit.
Can you explain? Can I just quickly?
Please,
So
that's fine.
it's like a
That's fine.
7,000 an hour. It's a long presentation.
Of course,
It's,
of course.
It's complicated. It's appropriate for it to be long. So can you just explain to me why you're not recommending this? It seems like you talk a lot about the 85 feet, right? But that wasn't one of the items that was up for discussion in the previous 2 slides.
Right.
So could you just be more specific?
Yes. It does not address the fundamental issue of the complexity for ventilation and evacuation within the transition areas, especially the ventilation issue.
Okay, and so, okay, I'll that's helpful. I'll ask more questions.
And I will say that there's a number of, I'm sure a number of folks on the board are going to have questions, and so if you can give us a
Sure.
little bit of an idea, the duration of this presentation, and the kind of questions that I'm thinking, the kind of questions that we're going to need to field today versus what action we all need to, us need to take in terms of what that timeline is, because you all have been committed as a staff to coming to this board twice a month, at least once a month, with these updates. So I just want to give us some
Yeah,
frame.
so I think Bob's got, I don't know, there's maybe 10 or 12 more slides here. The second, and then we go into a little bit on how, on Plan B, Grace, the general manager, has repeatedly said to this board and to me, Plan B is the twin bore. So there's the construction staging that we could walk the board through twin bore that's up here. And then, Director Simon, to your question, one of Bob's slides coming up here is the schedule on when the Bart board is going to need to take an action and what that action may or may not be.
Absolutely. So before you continue, I'm in the interest of time, with about 15 slides, I would say we have about maybe 30 more minutes for presentation time. Is that sufficient? Just to give us a little bit of a frame.
Okay, just go ahead.
All right, I can move quickly through some of these slides.
I mean, 30 minutes is a good amount of time. I think we can get there. I mean, I don't think that I'm as a chair, not going to cut you off. I'm just going to try to get a frame and understanding of how we then move through our questioning.
So in an effort to reduce the number of transitions, VTA came up with a couple alternatives. One is that you run in an all-stacked alignment from Alum Rock all the way through to when you come out of the portal in near Santa Clara. So you still have two transitions, you still have a 45-foot wide tunnel. They recognize that we have the evacuation issues with an all-stacked alignment. So they are not recommending this alternative, and we agreed with that decision. The next alternative is you move the transitions right around the downtown station. So instead of transitioning by Alum Rock and Santa Clara, you're transitioning just as you enter the downtown station area and you exit the downtown station area. So this is more of a significant improvement in the design because you're going from 4 transition areas to 2. You are still dealing with stacked alignment in and around the downtown station, and you're still dealing with the narrow side platforms at that station. I have to mention one major attribute of this is that in order to maintain side-by-side trackway at the Diridon and Alum Rock stations, you're going to have to do cut-and-cover construction at those stations. And as we've mentioned before, those are Alum Rock is an industrial area, the station site, and the Diridon station is a parking lot. So you're not dealing with the business impacts of constructing cut-and-cover at those locations.
Just a point of clarification. On this slide, I read this as there's only one stacked station downtown.
Correct.
I'm confused with the mention of Alum Rock.
Alum Rock would be a level side platform configuration, similar to some of our cut and cover station.
And my impression was that this was the option that has been on the table from day one. I don't recall seeing the 4 transition option.
No, the 4 transition option has pretty much been the base case for at least a year.
So they had been proposing a stack at Alum Rock.
Yeah. You braid, you unbraid, you braid, you unbraid. 4 transitions. And now there's just, in this one there would just be 2. And again, they were responding to the conclusions of the peer review panel as well as our own design criteria in coming up with this particular alternative.
What's wrong with this one?
Well, it's better, but it doesn't get us there all the way because you've gone from 4 transitions to 2 transitions and you're still dealing with the narrow stacked side platforms in the downtown station. The most heavily used station. Yeah, and VTA dismissed this one as well, largely due to cost considerations. An alternative that I think is more acceptable to Bart, probably the most acceptable of all the alternatives that they looked at, is you run in side-by-side configuration the entire subway, and you do cut-and-cover construction at all 3 subway stations. What it lacks is center platforms at those stations. It would have level side platforms to deal with the platform crowding issues that side platforms give you. You could potentially lengthen the platform beyond the 700 feet. So you would have more room for movement for people evacuating. This was another positive attribute of this option is the fact that they're looking at a 37-foot tunnel diameter instead of a 45-foot diameter, which means that the stations would not have to be as deep underground. Right. And then you would build the tunnel would just hold the trackway. And then when you get to the station, the track would be in the middle, the platforms would be outside. and you would do cut and cover construction to build the platform at the stations.
Wait, can you comment on that one?
Well, the key issue on that is it doesn't eliminate the community impacts to cut and cover construction in downtown San Jose, but it reduces them substantially because in the twin bore alternative, the footprint of construction includes not just the station box, but the crossover that would be next to the station box. So you would go from 1,000-foot construction footprint, 1,500-foot construction footprint in downtown San Jose to 1,000. In addition, this design does not require you to do the mined cross passages between the two tracks that the twin bore alternative has. So it has some positive attributes. And just to give you some
if I can just help just add to what Mr. Mitroff said to answer Director Josefowitz. So this does have some merit, and this one is intriguing to Bart. And the other thing that it does, I don't know if Bob, if you mentioned it, it eliminates the braiding and the unbraiding completely. And so that's a big step, to try to get to some compromise or some common ground here. So I'm not sure, Bob, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No,
I just wanted to throw that out there.
So I've got my notes, I can follow. All right, so you're talking about a 1,000-foot construction footprint in downtown San Jose. We've heard the mayor of San Jose make the statement that San Francisco took 2 generations to recover from the level of construction when Bart was first built. I don't know about that. That's 50 years. I moved out here in the late 80s, and Market Street was looking pretty good just then. But when Bart was built, we did cut and cover construction, not just of the station box, but of the tunnel. We opened up Market Street from Montgomery all the way to Van Ness. That's over 7,000 feet of construction. So we're talking about an area that's going to be significantly smaller than the original Bart impact, and we've got more modern methods of mitigating cut and cover construction now than we did back then. And we'll get to that in 1 second. Another alternative that VTA proposed was a really big tunnel, 58.5 feet. That would give you enough space to have not just the Bart trackway within the tunnel, but a 26-foot center platform. This would be the largest TBM used in the United States. It would increase the depth of the station platform to over 100 feet deep, and the risk of settlement is a big concern given the soil conditions. As the size of a tunnel increases, the risk of settlement increases along with it. So this was dismissed by VTA and their engineers. We did look at a halfway point, a 55-foot tunnel, which would have a sort of minimally acceptable center platform distance of 22 feet with a continuous concourse over it. A 22-foot platform is the same width that you have at 16th and Mission and 24th and Mission. And you could design a subway like this to utilize the continuous concourse over the platform to manage your crowding during delay incidents. And so we recommended this as something that was viable to Bart, although not preferred given the depth of the tunnel and the width of the panel. But in order to move the project forward with a united front, we indicated that we would be willing to go along with this. What add?
I would just add that we really struggled with this one before we got to the point of saying, okay, let's put this forward as something that we could live with. The reason we struggled with it is the width of the platform. I mean, it is, you probably know the situation we have at Embarcadero, which is, I believe, a 26-foot platform. So this is narrower than Embarcadero. And frankly, the reason we can live with it is because the working assumption here is that there will be platform edge doors, which have the effect of increasing the effective capacity of a given width.
So this is a summary of all the alternatives, just for your record keeping. And again, there's 2 alternatives that we think we could go forward with. The all cut and cover design with the 37-foot tunnel and the level side platforms, and then the 55-foot tunnel center platform option. Just to give you a little bit more information on the twin bore alignment, this map illustrates the area that we're talking about for street impacts. Again, it is just the 4 or 5 block area of Santa Clara Street in downtown San Jose. The phases of construction for the twin bore are laid out here. The first thing you have to do is relocate all the utilities. That's a highly complicated effort. It would take between 16 and 24 months. Then you would install walls on the side of the ultimate construction trench, which you could deck over, so you could finish building the station box while you've reopened the street. So you've got this period under station structure construction, 18 to 30 months, where block by block, Santa Clara Street is reopened. And then at the end of the job, you remove the temporary decking, you install the permanent station box cover, as well as restore the street. They estimate that we're 5 years of street impacts within Santa Clara, and they actually did a good amount of work on a staging strategy for this construction that was actually approved by Mayor Chuck Reed of San Jose before this phase of the project was put on the shelf. So again, you're looking at this area from Market Street, and unfortunately this is kind of confusing because you're facing south. Market Street is going to be the western limit of the project, and the area 1 block from City Hall between 3rd and 4th Street is the eastern limit. And what you would do is you would go block by block, opening up each block, doing your utility relocation work, and then decking over it, and then moving on. And this timeline shows over the 6-year period how this would sequence. Yeah, and it shows you the number of weeks associated with each of these phases in the upper color-coded diagram. So what we had at the beginning of this month was a constructability workshop with tunneling experts from all over the country looking at ways we could do even further mitigation of the time as well as the level of impacts during construction, and they came up with a number of interesting ideas, one of which everybody seemed to buy into was moving the entire alignment closer to City Hall, where you have vacant land near a Chevron station that you could stage the construction, and then by doing so you would not have to relocate all the utilities underneath Market Street, which is a major corridor through downtown San Jose. So anything more on that you would like to add?
No, last time I was up here, Bob, you told me to kind of sit down, so I'll just sit down here and be quiet.
Else? Good job. Okay, so just on the look-ahead schedule, here we are in March. We've got the O&M agreement negotiations, and we talked about that last month. Those have slipped to board presentations in May and June because we want to have an adopted Phase 2 project before we take the O&M agreement to the board. Otherwise, all the references in the O&M agreement to the Phase 2 project would have to be removed. Right now, we're coordinating with VTA management on a daily, hourly basis. VTA is going to be transmitting a memo to its board in a few weeks recommending a tunneling methodology as well as a station location. We've got a potential joint committee meeting of the Bart and VTA boards on March 29th, all leading up to the VTA board certifying their environmental document and approving the project on Thursday, April 5th, with a follow-up action by the Bart board on April 26th. That would be the second regular board meeting of that month. And with that, any questions?
I have a number of people on the stack, but before we do that, we do have one public speaker, one public comment, excuse me, and that's Roland Braun. And if I have mispronounced your name, please.
is Roland Trabana from San Jose. I've actually been working on Diridan for over 7 years now. Initially, it's on, but I need probably to kneel on the floor, so let me do that. So let me start again. So I've been working on Diridan for about over 7 years now, and initially it was to develop an underground high-speed rail station, and things were going well. Then about 5 years ago, the Downtown Association brought this issue to me with what was going on in Santa Clara. And we did come up with a station design. It's a Crossrail design station. If you go to London right now, it's nearly completed. It's the Bond Street Crossrail station. And it works, basically it works, you've got your two side tunnels, but when you approach the station, you diverge. And now that gives you room to have a central circulation tunnel. It's just like a tube station, except it's twice the size. I actually offered Mayor Ricardo and the entire Barcelona party on my own dime to stop by London on the way home and check it out and maybe get a second opinion. But the real issue that you've got with single ball, it completely destroyed the interface we had at Diridan, because the single ball is under Santa Clara. And now imagine you've got the Caltrain platforms coming like this, you're into the concourse. How are you going to be accessing stacked eastbound and westbound Bart platforms? It just doesn't work. I actually spent 3 weeks on that last summer to make it work. It doesn't work. You can't just have everybody dumping to the concourse and then heading right for the entrance to Bart. It's not going to work. So the only solution that you've got in front of you is twin ball. But what has to happen is that you do twin ball through downtown without any surface impacts. We just built 5 stations like that under London without any surface impacts. You know why? Because we build the stations not under utilities, we build them under buildings, including 2 15th century churches that we couldn't touch, otherwise people would scream blue murder. So we know how to do this, and in the last week I've actually been contacted by 3 firms, a German firm, a Spanish firm, and a US firm. The German firm were the people who invented sequential, excavation. They're the top experts in the world. They know how to do this. So what I'm going to ask you is that first of all, you stand behind your staff firm, because they gave you the correct information, and what they did just now was extremely professional, contrary to what I observed at the VTA board last week. I know that you're all under a tremendous amount of political pressure to support this single ball thing. And my advice to you, go with twin ball. We're going to make it work. We know what we have to do downtown to satisfy them, so there's no impacts to servers, both San Pedro Square and San Jose State and City Hall. This is going to happen. You just got to be patient, stand firm, and everything will be just fine. Thank you.
Are there any more speakers on this item?
Okay. Could the Deputy General Manager come to the podium? I just want to make you happy. So I'm going to be a bit of a heretic right now and say that I think that the executive team has done an incredible job of exploring all of the issues that are laid out here. And I am absolutely convinced, approaching this with an open mind, that the double bore is the right thing to do. And I think that but I really think that some of the issues are really about mitigation. And I do appreciate some of the discussion here, but if I were the mayor, I would be worried. Look at the Central Subway project in San Francisco that has gone far, and retail has changed in our world, but it's suffering right now, and businesses are closing, and you're reading in the paper about major buildings being sold. And I will say, representing the area where Bart and Muni did tunnel generations ago, I absolutely think that there have been impacts, and I think that there were decades in which these neighborhoods in the Mission and in Mid-Market have struggled, and in a city that has been a very successful city. And then I'm going to tell you that in the 80s and 90s, I worked in Los Angeles, right? I worked for the LA Metro system, and the system was supposed to go out Wilshire and go up Fairfax. And I'm Jewish, and so now I'm going to dive into it and say that the congressperson who represented that area, Henry Waxman, for decades was very afraid that a very traditional Jewish Orthodox community was going to be decimated by going up Fairfax. And so Congressman Waxman, he came and said that because there was methane from all the dinosaurs that died in mid-Wilshire, that there were going to be fireballs and that there was going to be all this stuff. And any engineer can tell you that methane is a reality, and you vet, and you allow it to escape in ways in which bad things don't happen. 30 years after blocking the subway from going up Fairfax and forcing it up onto Sunset, Sunset Hollywood Boulevard, Congressman Waxman came back and said, I was wrong, because it basically stopped the progression of the LA Metro out Wilshire into communities that are desperate, to get out of their cars. So I'm trying to offer a perspective that I think that what is at hand here is, how do we talk about doing mitigation in a way that maybe has never been done before? Because I'm a believer that Bart is an amazing agency. And what if we did the best job? Because the reality is, we pass these projects, we put extremely talented people like yourself, I know you're not running this project, but people like you who have a million things to do in a day. And as a result, it's the little things it's the death by 1,000 cuts. It's the little businesses that shut down. People that feel like they don't know that it got delayed a week when the street's going to be closed, and they're still kind of waiting there, and there's no parking in front of their business because we haven't changed the parking restrictions based upon this delay that happened elsewhere. And so what I would say to you is that I really think that, maybe a couple of us politicians on this board, or people that have been down this road, that we should think about a way of putting a rapid response team and having somebody with an engineering background, so that Jane Green, who is the lead engineer, she can't get into all the details, but Jesse Blue is an engineer that's working on this rapid response team and absolutely knows when things are changing and how we have to adapt. And then you have a marketing person, and maybe it's not our role to help businesses that can't lose 20% because they close their door. What do? Do you have weeknight specials? What do you do to keep these businesses alive and to better understand what the nature of the marketing is there, and maybe get some new businesses to come in who are so excited about the thousands of people that are going to be going to this station? How do we prime the pump? And then having language-capable people doing outreach. People who speak Vietnamese, Spanish, Chinese, down working in there, again, with those businesses and communities. And so what I would say is that this agency has done a fantastic job of laying out what the concerns are around construction, what the concerns are around safety and operation. But I think that ultimately we have some political leadership that kind of doesn't believe that we care enough to do this absolutely the right way. And I can tell you, I'm an old dog. I have been out here, I have seen these projects in San Francisco and Los Angeles, and people are of good intent. But if we create a system that is really about the vision of not decimating the businesses along this alignment, being so over them that it feels like we're their first cousin once removed, that I think that I'm not saying people are going to roll over and say, oh, I'm ready to sign on. But I think that and I know that we have mitigation efforts that we do. I'm just saying that I think that this is a unique opportunity because there are two very capable and talented agencies that are a bit in a logjam right now. And I just am suggesting that I think that there are ways in which we can really address the underlying issues that are here, which are people are afraid that, a city like San Jose, that we're going to have years of damage if we don't do it the right way.
So I would say, Director.
Oh, yeah.
Please respond.
I will be very brief, Director Simon, Chairperson Simon.
Actually, it's fine.
Okay, so Director Duffy, I couldn't agree more with you. Everything that you've said, I've been in meetings with the general manager about, if it's Plan B, the twin bore, how do we go about the construction sequencing to minimize the impacts on the businesses and the men and women working down there, the pedestrian environment, the bicycling community in downtown San Jose. That what you just said there, I've been in the general manager's office and had many discussions just like that. I think we can do that. There are examples of projects that have done that. The Seattle seawall that just finished construction up there went in and built that seawall and kept all of those businesses moving, an outreach plan. What you've described, so I came in a little bit early this morning and was paging through their final supplemental environmental document. What you just described, and I don't think you've read the document. Great if you have.
No, I have not.
It's a pretty thick document, is what is called in that document the Construction Outreach Management Plan. It's COMP for short. And it's like it's a couple, 3 pages in there, but it's got 2 big subtitles in there. One, it's a detailed description of the construction impacts. And then it goes on to say it's a detailed description of the mitigation measures proposed to be undertaken by VTA and its contractors, with Bart, that's assigned to mitigate and to the best extent possible with an outreach plan. Somebody going door to door, somebody walking the businesses through what's happening this week, what's happening next week. That's all. What you've said there is fairly well described, and we think, I think you're right. Bart and VTA should be able to and can do this. It has been done before, so I think we can. And I'm not disagreeing with you at all.
And it's hard because I'm trying to read the general manager, and I can't tell. Sometimes he looks really unhappy when I'm talking, so I'm not 100% oftentimes. But I would say maybe some of us as directors ought to go down and walk the alignment and kind of check it out and see what it is. And I think that we should have a PowerPoint about this aspect because, truthfully, it's separate.
Well, what I would ask is that there's some effort for Bart directors who are interested in really this mitigation question and maybe possibly
elevating it. That's what I'm talking about.
And elevating it and potentially going
elevating
through
it because
the
there's so much to be done. There's so many pressures and problems. If there are high level, extremely trained and talented people who are turned loose to really make this, as you would describe, a national best practice in mitigation, I think it will help to move us. And ultimately, this dissonance is costing money and time. It's a lot of money and time for the staff to have all these meetings and presentations. And so I'm just saying that I would like to elevate it so that hopefully our colleagues feel that we're as invested in the things that they're worried about in terms of the negative impacts as they are, and that we're as conversant. I could go before a group, even though I have the attention span of a hamster, and I could talk about what has been presented here because you've been consistent in educating us. But I think that if we could talk about mitigation and best practices and high-level staff and how we're going to focus on marketing and the interface between the mitigation people and the engineering staff, then I think that maybe we'll have a more receptive audience. And I will stop there.
Thank you. And I think that was very well vocalized, and I would encourage staff and board members to really lift up and move forward on those really important conversations. Thank you, Director Duffy. Director McFarland.
Thank you. First of all, my chief concern is life safety, and particularly in the underground. With the single bore 40-foot dimension, the only way to be able to get both cars in there is to have them close to the center so you could have the walkway on the outside. With that understanding, that's a killer. The primary underground advantage that we have throughout the rest of the system is that you have a walkway on the interior side where you can end up being able to get out of the train, get onto the walkway, get to the nearest cross passage door, go through and with emergency evacuation and rescue procedures, be able to get onto an evacuation train. The 40-foot dimension will never be able to accommodate that. Twin bore will be able to do that. I've got to tell you though that one of the things that ends up bothering me though is we're still 85 feet below ground. But if we can end up having a partition door that would end up allowing us to get from walkway to walkway and one bore to the other and have cross passage doors so that we can control the ventilation, then we've got a shot at it. Ventilation has a problem associated with, and by the way, going down to 37 feet is exacerbates it. The issue that we end up having with air compression, and Barney and I have basically been in the bore where if you stand in front of one of those ventilation fans and turn the fan on, it will knock you off your feet. Not to mention the fact that you can't even speak to someone next to you. But if you are in something like the Berkeley Hills Tunnel, and you end up standing in front of one of those fans, if you walk about 1,000 feet down the bore, then you can barely feel the wind blowing by you. And the larger the space that you have, well, let me rephrase, the smaller the space that you have in a single bore, the better control you have over that air compression. And the whole idea behind this is air is compressible. And so the further away you get from that fan, then the velocity of that air to provide you with the ventilation you need is going to decrease proportionately. Conversely, if you've got a fire, and even worse if it's an incendiary device and it's very hot, as you increase the temperature on a volume of gas, the volume of that gas space is going to increase proportionately. So the hotter you've got a fire, the more difficult it is to be able to provide effective ventilation. If you end up having a single bore that is open for the entire thing, we're asking for problems with ventilation that cannot be solved. If you've got a bore encapsulation where you end up having two bores, whether it's within a larger bore where you can end up having a separation, and what kind of excites me about the 55-foot bore is that not only will it provide problems with the station platform itself, yes it will. And guess what? We dig big holes for stations to accommodate what we need. But if you end up taking that slide and modify it to the point where you have an upper gallery and a lower gallery, similar to the Transbay 2, where you could end up evacuating people onto a train or from a fire train through a cross passage door into a lower gallery or a safe haven. Because then you basically end up having a recipe for survival. At the meeting that we had,
Because I have 4 more people on the staff.
Okay.
Thank you.
we end up having a recipe for survival. I will have to let you know and I'll just wrap it up here right now, and that is that during the January 17th, 1979 fire, one firefighter died. He was a friend of mine. If we had not had a lower gallery, or if we had had a 40-foot diameter with walkways on the outside, that would have been one death. No one would have gotten out of there alive. No one. And if we end up having a vertical system where the evacuation is going to be further exacerbated, the same thing is potentially going to occur. Nobody's getting out of there alive. Right?
Director McFarland's experience and expertise on safety and engineering, we're just extremely blessed to have not only your long service on the board and have seen so much. Thank you. And as members of the staff continue to bring items of these items to the board, I do hope we can hear and listen to more of your expertise and your pointing staff to, again, these historical moments in Bart's lived history. So thank you very much. Director Blaylock.
Thank you. Got a couple of quick questions. It keeps coming up that we get a smattering of information about the width of center platforms. And today I was surprised to hear that 15th and Mission is 22 feet and Embarcadero is 26, because I thought Embarcadero was narrower than Powell, Civic Center, and so on. So I wish we could get a little tabular summary that showed us what the station platform widths are, along with average annual passengers at that station, because Santa Clara County is expecting a certain quantity of passengers, and Mr. LeBrun at the meetings down there has challenged them, at least at the Near Dawn meetings, has challenged them about how their numbers could be that high when back upstream toward Fremont, they're not that high. But it depends on what horizon year you use. So I think it would be important, since we have to close off Embarcadero every so often when there is fireworks or some grand celebration because people are being could be pushed onto the trackway. I think it would behoove us to know what those widths are so that we can kind of relate to it. The staff knows it, but I don't think this board does. So,
Director Blaylock, if I could, we will provide that information to you shortly after this meeting for all of our stations. But just to give the board a quick context and to correct something that I think I said that was incorrect. Embarcadero is 28. I'm going to give you the 4 downtown stations. Embarcadero is 28, Montgomery is 35, Powell is 36, and Civic is 33.
Thank you very much for that. That's very enlightening. Then, when you give us the information, also give us the width of center platform at Fremont, at Warm Springs, Berryessa, and Milpitas, so that we know what they are building now. Okay, that's that. Then some things that are really of no concern of ours, but I think we ought to have a feel for them, is the larger diameter tunnel requires a consistently larger quantity of spoil to be taken out of the area. Now that's a cost to VTA. It's not on our head, but it can be a big disruption factor for the community. And when you have big trucks hauling large stuff out of there all the time, and then what the cost of spoiling is, that extra dirt is, I think those are important factors that they pay for, but I'm not sure they realize how big they are, and I'm not sure anyone's telling them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Blaylock. But I didn't actually open it up and provide any response to Director McFarland's both question, inquiry, and suggestions. Was there any staff response to some of the items that Director McFarland put out to the group before we go on to President Rayburn and Director Josefowicz?
I think he articulated Director McPartland articulated the issue, probably from a firefighter's point of view, but it endorsed what staff had already put on the record. Director McPartland has talked to me in the interim, and I guess I just want to put the context on the table. We have a decision coming to the board, which was put up on the screen in terms of timing, and I just want to alert you, I am not going to be recommending to this board what we consider to be an unsafe tunnel. And we have 2 or 3 options that are what we consider safe, the twin bore, but 2 options I think that can be made good that are single bore. That is not where VTA is headed right now. So everyone needs to kind of look up and stay tuned on this one. We are working very hard to try and address some of the issues that staff has raised. We're not there right now. I thought we were on a different path before, and I don't find that they have. We meet with VTA, I think, next week in an all-group session. But when we put on the safety issues on the table, we put some things that would be good to have, but we also put some safety issues on the table. Not all of those safety issues have been addressed, and I'm not going to recommend something I don't think is safe, and it's going to reflect what's here. Director McPartland captured some of that. So it's not, we're not coasting. And to the comments that Director Dufty made, he just gave the speech I've been giving to Bob. That's what Bob was referring to. So I was thinking, not what's going on. And it's because that can be made safe. It's 3.5 blocks of downtown. It is not the length of Mission and the length of Market. It's 3.5 blocks of downtown. We have businesses. I wholly agree with the mayor. They need to be addressed, but they can be addressed. And nobody's listening on VTA's part. You're not beating on us. The mayor doesn't want to hear that. The mayor wants to hear that there's no disruption to the street. And the plans that come up, there is some disruption, but we've got ways to mitigate a lot of it and to bring it down to a very small period of time. What has been said is that it's going to be torn up for 5 years, and there are segments of utility work that have to be done, but utility work's done on our streets all the time. There's a shorter period of time, a much shorter period of time, where the street is torn up on a 1 block basis and put back together, and it's a duration of 11 weeks, 3 months, okay, which is disruptive, but there are mitigating things that can be done, as we've all experienced in cities we've done these projects in. So you go in, you do the 3 months here, you seal it up, you do 3 months here, you seal it up, you do 3 months here, and there's a couple of 75 feet beyond that. So say 3 and a couple of feet on the next block. San Jose doesn't want to hear that. And I don't know if VTA does or not, but San Jose doesn't want to hear that. And so we're having a hard time getting there. So I have also been beating on staff considerably to make a single bore work, because plan A is a single bore. If we can make it work, great. These braids are counterintuitive to safety, given the volume. And also we're attaching this line onto the end of an existing BART line. This isn't a line where you can put up posters that for just this line, people, this is how you evacuate. We've got the standard evacuation going from wherever the train starts down through Fremont and on to San Jose, and it's the second half of a line. So we are trying very hard to make it work, and I just want you to know we're working really hard, and that's why you saw 2 options that we thought we could get behind on the single bore, still with some remaining issues. So this is very serious. I'm very disappointed we're not able to bring it here. We're working with VTA. We are very hard, but I'm not going to bring to you an option that I don't feel that the safety issues have been addressed. So I may be putting you in the difficult position to overrule staff and go with something that comes out of VTA, or to say no, and then we have to figure out what happens at that point. So thank you.
Thank you. And to the folks who are watching the live stream and folks who are here in the audience, I want to thank you for your patience as we move through this item. Nothing is more important, I think, to this agency as we build infrastructure that holds hundreds of thousands of people each day, that we get it right. We have 2 more folks from the board who want to speak on this item or ask questions or get clarifications. President Rayburn and Joseph, which would follow.
Thank you, Director Simon. One, I want to thank staff for being receptive to the VTA's proposals for option A to try to see if we can make it work. I wonder though, did either of the options, the 55-foot with a single platform, a center platform, and the 37, were those options reviewed by the peer review panel?
No, they were not.
I feel that overall our emphasis on safety is correctly placed, and if anything, the statistics that you shared, Paul, at the outset about the 2 fatal incidents, it's understated, because WMATA on January 12th did have the fatality, and then again on March 16th, and I was in Washington, D.C. that Monday morning, they had a second incident that the station filled with smoke. The system was closed down for over 24 hours, and then they embarked on a retrofit program. They got serious all of a sudden. So these kind of issues happen regularly, and we have to be prepared for them. We have to think about a 50-year period of time in which things do go wrong. So I'm going to suggest that we move forward with the twin bore unless we could be shown otherwise. Regarding the mitigations, I feel that I agree with the comments by Director Duffy that we need a robust series of mitigations. And I've been watching the AC Transit's bus rapid transit program. It's run into some controversy on International Boulevard with many of the merchants. Well, they plopped down an office right opposite the Bart station that anybody can find and go into. I don't want somebody from Santa Clara County to have to track down, well, where's Bart? Oh, they're in Oakland. No, we should have that office set up on the street for the duration of the project to field those kinds of issues. And that's been a success point for AC Transit in moving their project forward. They expect to open in 2019, and they've had this office for the last year and a half. So I'm going to leave it at that. I don't have the technical expertise to thoroughly assess each and every detail that's been presented to us today. So, and we will get to lunch and then come back and start in with the planning.
Well, we do have we have Nick, Director Josefowicz, and then we have item D. And so, President Rayburn, I'll ask you how you want to move after Mr. Josefowicz's comments.
Thanks. This is obviously we've had many discussions about this. There's been an enormous amount of work put into this. I think everybody's been exercising their no muscles very well. I think that the emphasis on life safety is clearly important, but the most important thing for life safety is getting people out of their cars onto Bart, because there are 9 people that die every day on the roads in California. There are 81 people that end up in hospital as a result of a serious injury because of a traffic accident. We can't lose track of the thing that we can do that is going to save the most lives is deliver the highest quality transit service, which includes having the most robust communities around our stations, which allow people to use our system. And so we can't, when we think about life safety, I think we can't just be totally myopic about whether someone is going, the safety of people once they walk into the Bart station. We have to sort of think of them sort of across their, about that sort of through their entire day. So that's something I just wanted to put out there because I think that's an important thing for us to consider. The other thing, a bunch of other things on the depth of the stations. We've heard an enormous amount about how adding an extra 30 feet of depth to a station is going to be a kind of this existential issue in terms of evacuation. The deepest subway station in the world is 346 feet. The platform is 346 feet below the surface. The deepest subway station in the United States is in Washington Park, in Portland, Oregon. I believe that one is 259 feet below the surface. And I grew up in London. The deepest subway platform in London is 191 feet below the surface. There are hundreds of subway stations around the world that are deeper than the ones that are being considered even for the Singapore in San Jose. So I'd like to get a response as to why we think that Bart is this kind of, the depth, the 85-foot depth, is this kind of, very unique system, very unique situation compared to all the other systems that are getting built, including ones that are being built relatively recently.
What I would say to you, Director, is the 85-foot depth and the associated issues, those are things that we don't like, but we took those things off the table and said to VTA, there are life safety issues that we cannot live with. An 85-foot deep platform is not one of those things. We don't think it makes a lot of sense. We don't think it makes sense to have only 2 entrances into a major downtown station. We don't think it makes sense to not have a full concourse. All of that has been taken off the table because of the seriousness of this issue and because of the need to move forward. We focused just on the life safety issues that we can't live with. And an 85-foot deep platform is not one of those issues, provided that they can convince us and show us that they have an engineered point of safety in the event of a fire.
So I appreciate that, and I think it would be good if. I understand that's the sort of the answer. The answer. That is not the impression that I got as a result of this presentation. I know there was that one slide you put up about the things that we've taken off the table, but I think it would be, I think there's a lot of issues here around like people trusting each other, and so I think we need to be really conscious when we're taking things off the table.
Put the list up that we gave for VTA.
No,
It's in there.
I know, but I think we need to be really, really conscious that when we do take things off the table, that they're really genuinely taken off the table. Because otherwise I think we're going to really struggle to make progress. Okay, but I mean, throughout this presentation, we had a lot of talk about how 85 feet doesn't work. It's like a huge problem for safety. So if those are the issues, those are the issues.
You have other items?
So, can you go into more depth as to what VTA is thinking about doing now? Because there were the two single bore options that were presented by VTA. That Bart seems to sort of be at this stage think that there's promise in. There's obviously still the option B, which is the two bore.
So it's our understanding.
Let me just so in what I've heard and the understanding that I have, Director Josefowicz, that the base option is the case that they're leading with, which is the option that's shown on the screen here. It's very similar to what was shown at the expert review panel, and with the major difference being those 4 dedicated first responder access shafts that they've added that are shown in those 4 red boxes that are up there.
And so have we communicated with them that this is not acceptable? And what was their response?
We have communicated that to them, and their response was that's still their primary option that they're going to lead with, is this they're calling the base option plus the 4 access stairs.
And so, okay. I mean, I guess we got less than a month to figure it out. Is that am I understanding?
April 5th, yes.
5th, okay.
And as Bob spoke to in the presentation, we reviewed with them a number of options that are here, and each one was systematically dismissed for cost or disruption.
And why were the 2 single bore options that was satisfied Bart staff from a life safety perspective? Why were they dismissed by VTA? The 55-foot.
I believe it's the risk of settlement in downtown.
That's the 55-foot one?
Yeah.
And what about the 37-foot one?
Well, the 37-foot one was dismissed due to the cut and cover street impacts downtown.
Okay.
I mean, do you have a summary of other questions? Because I want to make sure I have one more speaker after you.
So
actually, I have 2 more now.
So what are we going to get? How can we get a presentation on mitigation before we have to vote on this? Because I know that there was a few slides at the back here on mitigation, but we spent a significant amount of time talking about all the problems with the single bores, and we spent I know there's been a lot of work done on mitigation.
So Director, why don't I listened very closely to Director Duffy, and I wrote it on my notes here. So on the 22nd, I think is our next meeting here, we'll have a discussion in front of the board with mitigation.
Thank you. And I think that the timelines of this stuff is really important because I'm a bit messed up. I tried to add up the duration in the slide 28 that you had, and it came to sort of 10 and a half years, and we're talking about 3 months here, and that just didn't. It would be really helpful to go in depth on the timelines to really understand exactly what's going to be disrupted when, and the sort of the animation was super helpful. I'm really concerned that we are where we are on this, and I know it's not entirely. I know there's 2 people here, and I've got a wife and she's got a husband, and I know that when we have a fight, it's always her fault, and for her, it's always my fault. But we're like a month away from what is the sort of the largest transportation project that the Bay Area's seen in the past decade, and I don't have a lot of confidence that we're getting to the finish line on this, and I don't want to be, I feel it's our responsibility after all the work that's gone into this for the past 20 years, all the money that's been spent on this, all the effort that's been put in by sort of people cutting these deals long before I, was sort of got out of elementary school, that
we have a real responsibility to make this work, and sticking up our hands and getting to April 5th and saying like, oh shucks, we disagree, and the project sort of dies a little death. I don't think that's acceptable. I don't think it does. I don't think it upholds our responsibility to all the people who've been working on this for so long, and the promise of this to San Jose and the whole region. So I don't have the answer for what that is, but that definitely seems like, with the month out, we're really far apart.
Thank you. A month isn't a long time, given where we are. Thank you so much, Director Josefowicz. I have Director Keller and Director Salzman.
So I have a very short question, but first, Nick, I've been married a lot longer than you, and there will come a time when you learn it's always your fault. So I wanted to, and Director Josefowicz did touch on this. What happens if we don't agree? April 26th, what are the consequences of the two districts failing to agree on a configuration of the boards in downtown San Jose?
The FTA is VTA will submit to FTA, and we will be reported as not if there's still a disagreement and the board is there, we will be registered as not concurring with their project, and my guess is the FTA will come back and talk to both agencies and ask us to find a solution. I was the FTA at one point in time, and when people disagreed at the local level, we just sent them back to the shop to work together to figure it out before we bothered to present it to Congress, because it doesn't behoove a federal agency to take to Congress, dueling issues. That's just my practical answer.
And I appreciate that. So at some point, if we don't resolve it locally, it could go off to Washington. But it doesn't sound like, from your experience, they would reconcile it. They just simply send it back and say, figure it out, continue to work on it. Is there potential funding that's at risk if we fail to meet certain deadlines?
It has to do with the process. I'm not sure what VTA was told after they appealed for their extension from the FTA, but they have a pipeline they're trying to get into, and it most likely affects at some point in time their ability to go for funding. They were supposed to have their information submitted in March, and so did she get an extension? Did Nuri get an extension? So they got an extension to be concluded in the FY19 bill.
I think as Nick just pointed out a few moments ago, this project's been around a long time. A lot of people have done a lot of work to make it happen, and there's been a lot of money expended. So I think, both sides, I think, are trying to find a solution. But I think in order to make this project go forward, we're just going to have to figure this out, or there's an important project that's clearly at risk if we don't figure it out.
Just a little, if I might add,
onto that, and then we'll go
a little bit of Bart history. We were in the same situation on the SFO extension. The first project that we adopted was Alternative 6. It was all subway, one line into the airport, out of the airport, and to Millbrae. And that didn't work, and we came up with the Y stub. And it took, we had to do a supplemental recirculated document, but it got built. So this is not an unprecedented situation.
Thank you. Item, it's there's a lot to talk about. Director Saltzman.
I think most of it's been covered already, but I too just wanted to express some concern for where we are today and how we're going to get there in less than a month. I also would like to ask that for our next presentation and for the future presentations that the documents be sent to the board ahead of time. I know you're churning out these presentations every 2 weeks, but this was a lot to digest today, and it's, I think, difficult to then have the right questions to even ask when we're just taking it all in today and can't read it ahead of time. So even if you can't get it in with the board packet, it's really, really helpful if you can get it to us ahead of time so we can come a little bit more prepared. And I didn't know what the gravity of this presentation would be today until we just all sat here and got it. And I think that's part of why you're getting the response you're getting from the board today. So it would be helpful for us to have more than an hour or two to process these things, and if there's anything that's appropriate to communicate with us in the interim between the board meetings, since we're less than a month away, I think the more regular updates you can give us about how this is going would be appreciated, since we're all going to be thinking about it, and I assume pretty soon going to start getting a whole lot of calls about it.
Happy to do that, thank you.
And to that end, to the general manager, outside of getting us information, are there other things that you would ask of us in the next couple of weeks around whether it's reviewing these documents, contacting you all as we get questions from the public about the process? How might you advise us on how to concretize all that we've heard to be of best use while we're preparing for a vote and more information from the staff?
I direct all comments to Bob Powers, and he'll work with Carl and Mitroff and team to find out if there's any answers that you have. There is a committee that is a group of people that are scheduled to meet with the three members of the VTA board as well, and they have a meeting, but it's not scheduled for a bit. I think I'm not quite sure when that is. End of this month. So we'll keep you apprised of that too. Write you a note explaining that. Thank you.
That's fantastic. We're going to go to item D, if that's okay, President Rayburn. And then this is a continuance item. Thank you, staff, so much for that presentation. Oh,
I'm going
sorry.
to suggest
Please.
that we postpone item D until later in the afternoon. We still have closed sessions to deal with. I'm going to suggest that right now we recess to lunch, come back into this room at 10 after, Mr. President.
And before that recess and before Director Duffy, staff put thousands of hours really into this presentation. So we want to make sure we stand the thank you all for the excellent presentation.
So, Mr. President, I just want to raise it. The whole purpose of us recessing the closed session was to try and get to the two items that people are here to testify about. And I think to Director Salzman's point, the VTA presentation was very extensive. And so I'm certainly, I would hope maybe we could power through the two items that have, I think, about 14 people here to testify for. I think that would be appropriate.